What's up, YouTube? I've had some people ask recently if I can actually win a game of Magic the Gathering without the card Death Shadow in my deck. And so I wanted to see if I could. So I decided to play a Modern Challenge with Izzet Murktide, one of the decks that I'd say is top 3, 4 in the format right now, and just kind of see how it goes. So I have played Murktide on stream before, but it's been a minute. It's been before the Lord of the Rings set came out, so I'm a little out of practice, a little out of date. So I grabbed a list off of Goldfish, threw it together, didn't get any warm-up matches, jumped straight into the challenge, and decided to see how it goes. So if you haven't seen the Murktide deck before, you're probably living under a rock or new to Modern. Either one is acceptable, but here we go anyway. We got a lot of efficient threats: Dragon's Rage Channeler, Ragavan. A lot of lists run Ledger Shredder. We're seeing some new builds pop up with Orcish Bowmaster, Murktide Regen, a potential 2-mana 8/8 flyer, mixed in with a bunch of spot removal: Lightning Bolt, Unholy Heat, our 1-for-1 counter spells with Spell Pierce, Spell Snare, Counterspell itself, Expressive Iteration to help kind of take over the late game, and some cheap card draw with Mishra's Bauble, Consider, and Preordained to help us find the right pieces at the right time. In the sideboard, we've got some Evoke Elementals because, hey, can you actually win in Modern right now without Evoke Elementals? Because I haven't seen it. So we get access to Subtlety, Fury. We've got Magus of the Moon and Blood Moon. Magus to help us fight through decks that might run Besage to try to take out our Moon effect. We've got a whole bunch of 1-mana spot removal, or 1-mana counter spells, I should say, with Flusterstorm, Stern Scolding, Mystical Dispute, Force Negation, and extra dress down for those pesky Hardened Scales decks and Primeval Titans. We've got a Cast into the Fire for Blood Moon, a couple of EEs, and an Unlicensed Hearse to round out the board. So, yeah, let's just go ahead and jump into the recap. Played this in one of the Saturday challenges this past weekend. So, like I said, it's been a minute since I've played Murktide. Wanted to throw it together, see how it felt. It is probably one of my 3 favorite decks in Modern. Not purely on power level, but along with Death Shadow and Domain Zoo, like the archetype that I'm most interested in playing if I couldn't play Shadow for an event. So, we start off round 1. Looks like we're up against a Prowess variant with Lava Dart. I am already showing off one of these play patterns that I've got to get more used to. Before Lord of the Rings dropped, you'd really have a lot of games where you're like turn 1 Channeler, turn 2 play a Cantrip or a Ledger Shredder plus a Bauble or something like that. Get some value going. Now, with the introduction of cards like Orcish Bowmaster, I think it's a lot more important to play your cantrips or your interaction early and wait till you can get down that 3/3 Dragon's Rage Channeler. But, of course, I went for the turn 1, 1/1, and immediately got punished by a Lava Dart. Thankfully, we are able to get down a quick Murktide region thanks to the second Dragon's Rage Channeler. And we just want to hopefully keep it around a little bit. Decide to go for the block. If they have a Lightning Bolt, they could potentially kill the Murktide or trade off with the Channeler. Kill it if they have Delirium. But it looks like they're going to spend both sides of a Lava Dart trying to get Delirium. Fail on that end. So we do get to eat the Dragon's Rage Channeler. Keep our Murktide around. They get to kill our Channeler, deal a little bit of damage, but ultimately, I'm pretty happy with that trade-off. Like, opponent got rid of the darts in the yard. They gave up a couple lands. They're down pretty low on life. And we're just looking for, like, another piece of spot removal. Expressive Iterations, fantastic draw. Flip over this dress down to get us closer to Delirium. And hopefully just crack them a couple times in the face of the Murktide. The Spell Snare could be used on this Seek the Beast, but I'm a little more interested in hitting like a Manamorphose on their side or like a Sprite Dragon if they've got one of those, something like that. But looks like we get to steal game number 1. Sideboarding against the Prowess deck. I pretty much just took all the Ragavans out because I saw Lava Dart. Brought in my extra 1 mana counter spells. So like the extra Spell Snare, Spell Pierce. Brought in the Furies. Essentially, if you can keep dudes off the board, then you're going to have a pretty good time against them. But Spell Pierce a Harvest, try to keep them off having an extra threat, which of course they have anyway. But we've got threats. We've got Spell Snare if they go for like an expressive iteration, you know, like that. So we're not out of the woods. We are taking a bunch of damage here, unfortunately. And if you know anything about playing Death Shadow, it's that taking a bunch of damage is not always a good thing. It does leave you very vulnerable to cards like Lightning Bolt or Haste threats, which Prowess is pretty well known for. So, just hoping our opponent doesn't have anything too impactful this turn. Counter the Harvest, try to hope they don't have another spell, and unfortunately they've got like the best spell for the situation. Just another Lightning Bolt to take out our Channeler, attack through for 6. So we get to go to game 3. Game 3 hand's really good. We've got Unholy Heat for the first threat. We got Spell Snare for like a follow-up, Seek the Beast or Questing Druid, Expressive Iteration, something like that. We could evoke a Fury if they go really wide on threats. No mutagenic growth here is great. Now, I would really like to get to hard cast this Fury, because one of the great things about these evoke elementals is not only being able to evoke them for free, but having the flexibility of getting to turn 4, 3, 4, 5, and getting a hard cast body that also has a good ETB effect. And when your opponent's missing land drops and the game's slowing down a good bit, there's a reasonable chance we might get there. I could keep a hearse on top, but my opponent's best use of the graveyard is going to be something like Underworld Breach, which they've trimmed on with the introduction of Questing Druid. Plus, I've got a Spell Snare in my hand, so I don't feel like I'm in too bad of a shape to a Breach. Get the 2 for 1, like I mentioned earlier, get that Fury down, plus take out a dude on board. And it always feels good to expressive iteration into like a live spell plus a land drop, or a live spell plus another live spell. Opponent's double Swift Spear is met with a dress down, takes away the haste from the Swift Spear. Mostly just protecting myself from something like a mutagenic growth, giving me a big chunk of damage there. Like if a mutagenic growth came down and flipped over Delirium, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 damage coming through. Ugh. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be hit in the face for 11. So them fetching up this blue for expressive iteration means we get to Spell Snare that. We have Counterspell up for any sort of like bolt shenanigans to shrink our Murktide. And our Murktide will be a lethal threat on the crackback. So we win game 1, or win match 1 on the game 2. Match 2. Words. Win another die roll. Love to see that. We see Mycosynth Garden on the top of their library, so we know they are an Amulet Titan build. Opponent F6s through their first turn. I feel kind of bad about that. If this were like an F and M, I would let them like. Obviously, they wouldn't F6 through their turn at an F and M. That'd be so weird, right? Like, pass the turn. Oh, pass back. What? You didn't play land. But the F6 through their turn, which I feel bad about, but at the same time, when you're in a tournament for like actual money, you kind of have to stop feeling bad and play the game. But we are able to dress down an Arboreal Grazer after a Summoner's Pact, which is pretty fun because they can't pay for Pact on their next upkeep, and they would end up dying to their own trigger. Sideboarding, bring in Magus, bring in Blood Moon, Subtleties, EEs to fight over amulets, all that fun stuff. Just kind of hoping to slow the game down a bit so I can maybe find a Murktide. Unfortunately, they have Cavern of Souls here, which is pretty rough for me. Like, I do get to kill the Azusa, we'll get to land a Blood Moon, and at least at the moment, they don't have access to green mana, so that's pretty nice. If they have a 1 ring right here, that would suck. But it looks like they don't, so we do get to get down a Channeler, hold up a counter spell. And it looks like our opponent does top deck a 1 ring. So we got really, really fortunate there to dodge it for a turn. Flip. So I decided to flip over the Magus because 1, it gave Delirium. 2, they didn't have access to green, so they wouldn't be able to Beseiju my Blood Moon. And then they immediately followed up with a forest into a second forest. So I don't know if my opponent was like sandbagging the forest, which I don't know if it would make a lot of sense to do that. Or if they just drew into them. But the double forest 1 ring worm coil engine is pretty terrifying. And then Terrace under my Blood Moon. So they kind of had everything they needed to get out from Blood Moon or to play through it. Just thankfully, we did have the double counter spell. And we're able to put up enough pressure to get the game closed out before our opponent can find something too scary off the top. We did see that 6 mana Dramoka there. And on to match 3. So it looks like Hammertime. Giver Rune's usually a pretty good indicator of that. From what I hear from the Murktide players, Hammertime's typically a pretty rough matchup. Hard casting a Colossus Hammer means almost assuredly they've got, what's it called? Pure Steel Paladin in hand. Because usually if you don't have Paladin, you want to hold those hammers to find a potential Sigarda's aid. And chip through some damage. I could have dashed Ragavan last turn, but I really don't like creating that play pattern where like I have to use up a lot of my mana every turn to dash Ragavan when I could be like holding up that mana for something more interactive. Decided to Spell Pierce the Springleaf Drum mainly because the only card I know in their hand is Spell Pierce and I don't want them to have it open on my turn. But also because if I don't pierce that drum, like my Pierce is just dead after this. So I might as well get some value out of it now. The extra mana might help them. I doubt it does, but anything that gets them closer to a potential hardcast Cauldra is bad for me. So, but at least we have our Channeler down. We get a little bit of a flying break in the action. We know their last card is Spell Pierce, so I decided to offer up the full board trade for the Ragavan. So now we're able to bolt the Mem Knight, shrink the construct to a 2/2, so we know that it's going to trade with the Ragavan. Clear off the board. Channeler's the only thing living. They've got Spell Pierce and Unknown, so as long as they don't whip a threat for a turn or two, which Inkmoth unfortunately is a threat. An Expressive Iteration would be nice. They've got 2 Unknowns. We've got an Unholy Heat, so feeling pretty good. They'd have to have a pretty specific set of Unknowns, like a Sigarda's Aid and another Hammer and a Surge of Salvation, I think would do it. Yeah. that will in fact do it. So if your 4 straight draws are Ink Moth, Sigarda's Aid, Hammer, Surge of Salvation, you will get across the finish line there. Sideboarding against Hammer, took out the Ragavans. Think I took out a couple counter spells, brought in like Furies. I think I brought in Subtleties. Honestly, can't remember if I brought in Subtleties. Cast into the Fire, EEs coming in, Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon. So we want to cast our spells second main phase. So if we flip over Delirium, then Channeler doesn't have to attack. But I end up dress downing in case they have something like a, what's it called? Stoneforge Mystic. They won't be able to do anything. And then if they have equipment, then Pure Steel Paladin won't be able to throw it onto something during their turn. So just really, really trying to slow the game down as best I can. We Fury, the Giver, and the Esper Sentinel there. So if they let the Esper Sentinel go, then like maybe they think I've got a removal spell and want to protect the Pure Steel Paladin. But if they let the Esper Sentinel go, they get farther away from being able to equip up something off the Pure Steel. Like this. So big ol' attack. I'm just going to eat that, unfortunately. Feels bad, but I know I'm going to get to untap with EE to blow up the Esper Sentinel, Hammer, Shadow Spear, and Relic. So that's kind of a big deal. I got to give them a draw here, but you get what you get. Can't attack in. Backup Sigarda's Aid, honestly, kind of fine. I mean, at this point, with the Pure Steel, if they had an equipment, they could have strapped it up anyway. Giver of Rune's pretty good. Giver of Rune's pretty dead. There's not a reason to attack with both Murktides because they're dead in the air next turn anyway. So if I attack with both of the Murktides last turn, I run the risk of them finding something to deal with the big Murktide. Or I run the risk of them not getting... how am I phrasing that? So I'm not saying what I'm meaning to say. If I attack with both of them, I'm not speeding up the clock, but I run the risk of them having something to attack through while I'm tapped out. So like a Ginger Brute could come down and just attack through and put me dead. Ginger Brute plus the Giver of Runes. Or Hammer on the Hammer on the Ink Moth. No reason to attack with both of them. That's all that matters. So opponent's got a turn 1 Sigarda's Aid. Sanctifier thankfully gets spell snared. I will say while we're like early on in the event, the spell snares were pretty decent for me. That being said, I didn't see a lot of matchups where Spell Snare was particularly bad. We did see Amulet Titan earlier like last round, but I didn't see Spell Snare, so. Flash in an end of turn Nettle Cyst, which was not on my radar. So, unfortunately, we've got to be pretty good about finding an answer to that. We could have gotten Murktide, but I don't think a small Murktide into a whole bunch of open mana with a Sigarda's Aid is where I want to be. Instead, I can hold up Unholy Heat to fight over a Hammer. Obviously, if they have like a hammer plus a surge, I'm in rough shape. Can't beat that, but at least we get the opportunity to get the surge out of hand. Fury is a pretty good option here. We can evoke that. Even if they animate the Inkmoth Nexus to save the Germ token, it would still die because the Memnite died. Unfortunately, another Surge of Salvation means we got to be a little reactive. But Relic comes down too late. Murktide gets to come down, stand in front of the Phyrexian Germ token. Will force them to use all of their mana to re-equip to the Nettle Cyst if they want to be able to attack. To which we have a Lightning Bolt. So if they animate the Inkmoth, use their mana to equip the Nettle Cyst, we've got Lightning Bolt to fight over that. Stern Scolding hits the Stoneforge. We've got a lethal Murktide. We can kill an Inkmoth Nexus when they animate to block. And with the second red removal spell, we can fire one off. And even if they have a hammer or a Surge of Salvation, we can fire off the second one in response to win that game. So, good job, us. Out here winning bad matchups. So we're actually 3-0 right now, which I'm shocked about. I did not think that was going to be in the cards. Turn 1 Channeler. We've got an Iteration on top. Opponents on Tron. My Nemesis. We'll throw a bunch of stuff in the graveyard, just trying to get Channeler online. Of course, we see that our opponent's top card is a Relic of Progenitus. Just kind of hoping that maybe they use up their mana. Unfortunately, they crack the Relic. So now it becomes up to me to replace the graveyard as quickly as I can. Unfortunately, not finding a third land means that's going to be a much slower process. Now we've got Warping Whale. We've got Expedition Map. I'm just kind of hoping that Spell Pierce may be able to hit a Karn or a One Ring here. Just kind of try to catch a little bit of a break. Got Counterspell up. Opponent's got more mana than they know what to do with. Well, we have to counterspell a One Ring. I don't know if you've played against that card yet, but it's kind of obnoxious. So they had 2 copies of the One Ring. Love to see that. I'm joking. You don't love to see that. One Ring stops me from being able to dash Ragavan for any sort of benefit, and then Hardcast Ulamog takes out Murktide in the land, so pretty easy scoop there. It does get a little bit better after sideboarding with cards like Force of Negation, Blood Moon, Subtlety, Magus of the Moon. Take out Cast into the Fire is great. Mulligan decisions. Let's rewind a little bit. So it's taken a little bit of time to start getting to this point with my mulligan decisions with a lot of these blue-red X decks. Is you have to understand like how good Ragavan is in the matchup. So a sketchy 7 or like a good in the blind 7 can become like a sketchy 6 that is just sent over the top if you have a Ragavan. So like this is a really good hand in the blind. I've got a cantrip into a counter spell. I've got Subtlety to answer something. I got Murktide eventually. But against Tron and knowing I have Ragavan in the deck, it it becomes so much easier to ship those hands back and say like, okay, well, this hand is turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 maybe cast into the fire an expedition map, or hit them, get counterspell online. Like, my options just really, really open up with Ragavan. Maybe I hit a Karn the Great Creator off their library. Like, I don't have to worry about mana. We are not going to be casting their Chalice of the Void. I know some people at home might be a little bit sad about that one. Like, oh, you could have chaliced on 10. Technically, you'd be correct. I decided to let the Sylvan Scrying resolve because, like, they're going to go get a Tron land. I've got Blood Moon to shut off the Tron lands anyway. And then a little bit of sequencing here. We Blood Moon first and then play the Spire Bluff Canal so that we can have it come into play untapped. Expedition map will let us get our second basic island so we could have access to Subtlety. I feel the likelihood of my opponent having another copy of the One Ring is pretty good. So let's Subtlety the Karn. They just smartly decide to put it on the bottom instead of putting it on top where Ragavan could hit it. But we'll attack in. We cast into the fire the expedition map so that they can't go tutor up a Boseiju. And then my clock is good enough that, like, I don't really care about casting their One Ring. I just want to hold up counter spells. O-Stone's fine because I've got the Lightning Bolt, so they're not going to be able to untap and O-Stone me. And if they had anything that I cared about in the meantime, I could counterspell it. And we get to sneak away with game 2. On to game 3. Again, mulligan decisions. That opening hand of like turn 2 counterspell, turn 3 Blood Moon with Subtlety and Murktide is a solid hand, but I have Ragavan in the deck. Why keep the hand that does some stuff when I could keep the hand with Ragavan that does the stuff better? So now instead of turn 2 counterspell, turn 3 Blood Moon, we just get turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Blood Moon. We get to follow it up with a Magus of the Moon so they can't get like a Boseiju. They'll only have 3 mana this turn, so they won't be able to One Ring or Karn. We get another attack in on them, and we just really, really hope that their 4 mana payoff is a Karn and not a One Ring, so we can, like, Subtlety, keep the pressure going. And Snaring Bridge would be good if they didn't have 6 cards in hand. But as you can count, they do have 6 cards in hand. So we're able to kind of sneak in under that Ensnaring Bridge pretty well. Also, I adjusted like every audio setting. Now we get to counterspell One Ring. We have lethal on the crackback. I adjusted like every audio setting on my mic I could possibly find and tried testing it, like listening to the replays. So I hope the audio quality is a lot better than it has been. If it's still pretty low or something like that, or if it's cutting in and out, let me know in the comments down below. But I will be listening to the replay before this goes live, so hopefully it's okay. So we're on to round number 5 against Chris MTG, I believe at the time of making the video, the current trophy leader for Modern. plays like exclusively Amulet Titan, so pretty good idea. That's what we're up against before this starts. Unfortunately, looks like a pretty good hand out of them too, being able to Grazer plus use Saga on turn 2. I've got no mana, so we're just going to try to poke in some damage and kind of consider the turn a wash. But it looks like they're going to have a Primeval Titan this turn. And boop. Yeah, so we'll scoop it up to that. We don't have an answer for the Titan. They're going to be able to haste it up, get in a big attack. If they had the Summoner's Pact for the Titan, maybe we see a draw step, but... And then we already talked about sideboarding against Titan. Unfortunately, I can't do much if I just have like Unkeepable 7, Unkeepable 6. Just hope that Magus plus a couple counterspells can get there. Thankfully, I can get double basic island. We'll keep counting to the Besage, or not the Besages, the Bajuka Bogs. So that there's nothing in my yard, but I've been bogged once. They've got the Dismember for the Magus. Pretty rough, but happens. Dryad pickup bog. Okay. One ring. We got a counterspell for that, but we're going to get bogged again. So 2 bog, pick up bog. Oh, there's 3 bog. Are we going to pick up bog? Yeah, we're going to pick up bog. The old tree bog. Surely they won't do it to us again. We'll double Valakut. It's pretty solid. Maybe we'll die by the bog. Quad bog. Valakut it out. Mold a 5 into just like a Dryad value hand is pretty rough. But I don't think there's anything we could have done about it that match. On to round number 5, or round number 6. Bruno Prince here was actually the one that won the entire event. I am proud to say out of my losses, 2 of them made top 8. Which, a little bit of foreshadowing. We've only shown 1 loss so far. I'm going to take a guess where the second one comes from. So we're going to get Demolition fielded. If we can find a threat, we do have counterspells to kind of protect a little bit. Well, we're definitely not letting a Karn resolve. So like a Murktide off the top would be really, really good here. It's almost a Murktide off the top. Float our blue so we can consider for free. There's a Murktide. All right. Well, they take out all of our red sources, but we do just have Murktide plus Counterspell, and that's pretty good. It's not really a reason to bolt them. It doesn't change up the clock at all. Opponent passes the turn to us. Feel pretty good with this Counterspell. To take out a Shieldred's Edict. Didn't have a Shieldred's Edict on my radar. And then getting to bolt them down to 2 here. Very relevant. I was not expecting Damnation. It used to be a lot of these mono black lists were like heavy on removal spells that couldn't deal with Murktide. So you'd see a lot of Fatal Pushes, Bowmasters, Dismembers, and what was the other one? Oh, opponent just played a go blank, Pioneer Staple, ditch 2, exile the yard. They had multiple go blanks in the main deck, which was wild to me. But they're going down to 1 life with a 1 ring, which, of course, if you've played against any of these mono black decks, you know means after they get the ring, they're going to have a Shieldred pretty quickly. Well, we're looking for a Rag or something, and there's the Shieldred. So now they can activate the 1 ring to be able to draw. We find the Ragavan just a turn too late. And now, unfortunately, the game kind of runs away from us. It's so frustrating to get them down to 1 life and then just ring Shieldred like absolutely pulls away. Unholy Heat my Ragavan just to stop some of the life gain. But they still have about 1 million mana approximately. I haven't run the numbers. I decided to go for the Unholy Heat right away, just in a chance that I flip over Delirium. Unfortunately, opponent takes as an opportunity to tap out for a full power March of Wretched Sorrow. So we went from maybe having a slim chance there to not a chance at all after this March. And we'll scoop it up. We don't flip over to Delirium to deal with the Shieldred, so on to the next one. Sideboarding. Brought in Blood Moon. Didn't bring in Magus because they got plenty of ways to deal with it. Took out some of the spot removal. Brought in, what did I bring in? Subtlety and Blusterstorm. Force of Negation. Spell Snare can answer. Bowmasters. Shieldred's Edict. I just need to buy myself a few turns. Then go blank. Again. I thought that was a pretty interesting main board consideration. Like, go blank I know has been very popular in the Pioneer decks currently. It's a really good answer to the Arclight Phoenix decks, some other graveyard decks running around, things with like Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time. Didn't so much expect it in Modern, but it's cool to see it kind of finding some area of play. So we do end up finding another counterspell, which is really nice. And we've got 2/3/3 Dragon's Rage Channelers, so good clock. I'd rather counterspell a payoff than counterspell a 1-for-1 spot removal spell. That looks like a payoff. Keep Subtlety on top because it's a really good card into like a Karn the Great Creator. And I figure if I'm attacking, getting a Murktide down here, then maybe Subtlety works to protect me from a payoff for a turn. Unless they just have a Damnation. That's a little rough. but they are going to let me float the mana to be able to subtlety. And they're kind of representing like Orcish Bowmaster with playing this second Urborg. So I'm hoping that that's the case, and I'll just be able to spell snare it and get some sort of value out of the spell snare. But it looks like our opponent has plans outside of another 2-drop. So chip in for 3. Opponent is down to 1 card, so flashback a Cling, draw a card. Card is a hard cast Leyline of the Void. That's pretty okay with me at the moment. Decide to keep the other Murktide because it is a body I can put on the battlefield, which is better than a lot of just random top decks until your opponent hits another ring. So, rings for days. They did end up having the Bowmaster, so glad we didn't play out the Ragavan for no reason. But we just need them to have, like, a really bad top deck right here. And with the Force of Negation, I feel like we can beat a good number of things, like another Damnation. Cycle of Troll is fine, so we know one of their cards is dead. They've got a Cling to Dust on one of their own guys. They Cling to Dust a Troll, which is fine with me because they're still dead to my 2 flyers plus the 1 ring. Draw off the 1 ring, and they find... Emrakul the Promised End. That's what I expected. That's the card I thought they would have a chance of top decking to get out of this. So, opponent's going to wreak havoc on our board. Attack into their own Emrakul, bolt off our own guy. And yeah, I don't believe we're going to be able to get out of this from here. There's Blood Moon that doesn't really do anything here. And unfortunately, they'll get to draw more cards off the ring, especially with a Shieldred. But we'll at least make them draw first to give ourselves a chance of top decking like a Lightning Bolt until I remembered that, Emrakul has Trample. So a lot of this is kind of moot at this point. They just want to cast cards and do stuff, and we're just dead to the Emrakul attack. They know my hand perfectly. Such is life. Mono Black has been a bit of the thorn in my side for several events now. So on the play, round 7, I finally learned, hey, don't play out the Channeler turn 1 unprotected. It just took me like 6 rounds and playing against another Giganta. I kind of thought it was Tron, but not Tron. Polluted Delta, Watery Grave, Preordained. Kind of makes me think it's a Shadow list, which would be really cool to see Shadow at this point in the tournament. Drown kind of making that thought look a little more real. Like, it's looking pretty shadowy. It is. It is shadowy. This was a punt on my part. I went for the end of turn consider to go to my turn and like lightning bolt the shadow. I should have just lightning bolted it on their turn. I know the interaction. I just wanted to fire off the consider, but I should have been mana efficient on my removal. So if you don't know, Dress Down makes the Shadow a 13/13. It removes the ability to give it -X, just becomes its base power and toughness. But if Shadow has damage marked on it, at the end of the turn when the Dress Down leaves before that damage is removed from the Shadow. The damage isn't actually removed until the turn passes. So at the end of turn, the Dress Down's removed. The Shadow would have 3 damage marked on it from Bolt. It would go back to being a 1/1. It would regain that -X ability, and it would die as a state-based action. But I chose to go to my turn instead. And I think I should have just bolted it and then gone to my turn and seen my draw before I made any decisions. Like it probably doesn't, it didn't change the outcome of the turn, but I think there's a reasonable chance that some of the decisions might have been changed based off what I saw there. But ultimately, this game is just coming down to, like, can I find a Murktide Regent? And we do, but it might be a little too late here. Especially if they just have, like, one more threat. They'll be able to attack around the Murktide pretty well. Or a Thoughtseize to take the Murktide. Or a Thoughtseize and a threat to attack around. So, a little bit rough, but that's how it goes. It's kind of funny because, like, I really don't like Dragon's Rage Channeler. Obviously, it's good when you're able to string a couple of them together early and your opponent doesn't have enough interaction for them. So that's pretty cool to see in action. But I feel like for me, on a pretty regular basis, it doesn't play out that way. So we got a little Channeler on Channeler action. We've got a very reactive hand, which can be okay, depending on who gets, like, the early tempo advantage. If we were hitting our land drops, I'd feel a lot better about it. I could have saved the Channeler with the Mystical Dispute, but I wanted to hold up Counterspell through their turn instead. But it looks like they're going to have a Bowmaster. So, unfortunately, like, letting them resolve a reasonable threat while I'm tapped out of Counterspell because we didn't hit those land drops really sucks. Dash Rag gets counterspelled. If they have a follow-up like a Shadow or something, we could be in some trouble. No Shadow. We don't have any draws outside of the Fire Islet right now, so the token's a little bit bigger deal than the actual Bowmaster. But this is definitely not the spot I want to be in this matchup where, like, I'm being the reactive deck, but I'm having to play out, like, at sorcery speed. Or I should say, I have a very reactive hand and I'm having to play out sorcery speed. So we've got Giganta coming down. We've still got 3 unknowns in hand. Find an Unholy Heat for the Giganta, even if they get to ping us and make a token. pinging us and making a token isn't killing us, so that's a big plus. Just kind of come down to another turn where if we can find a Murktide Regent, we feel pretty good. We got bad mana leak for the Terminate. Don't want to fire off this Fiery Islet yet. But they end up having the Thoughtseize plus the Terminate for our dude, plus the Bolt for our face. Kill us with the Bowmaster. And that was the end of our event. So we ended up in 16th place. Our last opponent on Grixis Shadow ended up 10th. Our other two opponents that we lost to, Chris MTG and Prince, both made top 8. Prince ended up winning the entire event with Mono Black. So we did see some really good competition this event, and I felt like I came out of it with a lot of room to grow. I recognized several of my play mistakes, which is really awesome to have happen over the course of an event when you see like, oh, I messed this up because of this. And I understand that's how and why I messed up. So recognizing those, I think, is a crucial part of getting better at tournament magic and getting better with a new deck. So I do want to play some more Murktide in the future. I think it's a very solid archetype. Some of the card choices that I might change around. And again, I have to point out this is from like not playing Murktide in the current meta. So I just grabbed a list, ran with it. Doesn't necessarily fit my play style. I would like to go down a Murktide. Like, there were some games that I really wanted to find one, but there were more games that I got flooded on them and had like 2 Murktide and didn't want one. I'd like to go down a Spell Snare. So that's 2 trims. Probably down like a Dragon's Rage Channeler and find room for a few Ledger Shredders just to help in like that early to mid transition period where you really want to go like Shredder into Iteration plus a spell, dig for Murktide, get a reasonable body on board. The flying's very nice. Bowmaster is a reason people might be a little concerned about Ledger Shredder, but at the same time, if you're discarding non-land cards, then your Bowmaster is not hitting you, or the Bowmaster token isn't outgrowing the Shredder. So you kind of have that little bit of a built-in safety measure, but being able to dig for Murktide a lot more efficiently or keep the gas kind of going, because I did flood out a few times there where I just couldn't find a little more action. I do think Ledger Shredder would help that a bit. Sideboard, I think, was fine. Cast Into the Fire is probably the weakest card in my opinion. That could just be, I don't know, another Fury or something. But I feel like with the One Ring, if Counterspell and Spell Pierce, Force Negation aren't dealing with it, then exiling it after it's already resolved, it's probably already done too much for you to recover from just with that Fog turn. So I'll be messing around with some sideboard slots over that. As always, if you are enjoying the commentary, enjoying the content, feel free to drop a sub on YouTube. Doesn't cost you anything. Just lets you know whenever the new videos are going live. Really, really close to that 1,000 subscriber sub goal. So if you get a chance, feel free to hit that. Otherwise, I'll have a link to the Twitch down below if you want to come check out a live stream, as well as the link to the deck list and a link to the Discord if you want to come talk shop, if you got opinions on cards that are working really well for you in Izzet Murktide. Feel free to leave them in the Discord, leave them down here in the comments on YouTube, whatever you want to do. Happy to check them all out. And yeah, we'll catch you later on the next one. Hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. Catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.